So I'm Christian Conaway. I would say best title for me is kind of like artist. I think that's the broadest reaching because it doesn't really define stuff. I've done things like painting and music, and that's what I'm currently doing is music. But I've also done stuff in robotics, finance, and nonprofit work, all in a really short span of time. I asked my mother what is the one thing that I've done my entire life that's been pretty consistent. She said music. Although I never started formal or any diligent practice until I was 9, and I picked up the alto saxophone. I remember I wanted to play the trombone, but my arms weren't long enough and I wasn't strong enough to pick up the instrument itself. So I picked up alto sax, which is good because it taught me the treble clef instead of the bass clef. And I remember I just really liked it, and I excelled in band class, and I was learning how to improvise things on the saxophone. But what really got me was at 2 of my aunts and uncles' houses, they had pianos or a keyboard. And I remember I would sit during the parties. There'd be the cousins that I liked hanging out with, but if there wasn't video games, I'd sit at the keyboard and I would just play notes and listen to it and be like, oh, that's cool. And then I'd write little songs, and I loved it. And then someone taught me how to play Heart and Soul, and I made hundreds of little variations. I remember it. There's tons of them. I didn't know what I was doing, but slowly over time I was learning arpeggios and sevenths and alternating chords. I just didn't know what they were called, but I was playing Heart and Soul, just nonstop. So finally when I turned, I think it was 10, I got a keyboard. They gave me a keyboard for my birthday. I played that every day for several hours. It was fun, and slowly it became a cathartic thing, because I remember in my house there's a lot of infighting and disagreements. There's a lot of yelling. Whenever I was upset, I would go play sad and depressing music on the piano, and that's what I would do. I knew how to read sheet music from the elementary school, but I couldn't read piano sheet music as quickly. I didn't know how to read bass clef whatsoever, and rather than take the time to learn that, I went onto YouTube to learn some songs. Mainly I just wrote songs that I made up. An interesting thing is I can play every single motif that I've written since I was 10, because they're so ingrained into my being that I can remember their shapes and how they felt and why I played them. And so now whenever I play improv, I pick from those motifs. I go, oh yeah, this feels like when blank fight happened and I wanted to express this emotion. And I can play that motif, but now with more of a mastery over the instrument, I can make that motif even better. And that comes across now a lot when I'm teaching people how to write, or when I'm reminding myself how I need to write, because I get caught up and hang myself up. Most of the melodies and motifs you hear are very simple and can be written by anyone. You just have to pick random notes and be like, that sounds okay. What makes it music and what makes it more, beautiful or powerful or complex and whatnot is you take that simplicity and you learn how to express it better. You fractalize it, you explode it open and show things about it. Like if you take Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and you're Mozart, then you get the variations of the Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and it blows your mind. You're like, I could never play that. But it's a very simple melody. I watched a video about 12-tone music, I remember, and I was like, oh my gosh, using notes not in the scale, that's insane. Who does that? Because at the time I only knew the D scale and the C scale, and everything else was kind of foreign. And so I learned about that, and I was like, oh, it doesn't matter. I can play any note. And that opened up whole worlds of music. There's one memory that's been sticking with me for a very long time now that happened kind of recently. It was like a year ago. But when I was at the big festival Burning Man, which I got to by a weird string of coincidences. But while I was there, I was kind of overwhelmed by the pleasure city aspect of this whole gig. There's all these people, and they can do anything that they want. And so the first day I went around, I drank with friends or new people that I consider now friends, looked at art and all this, but on the second day I was like, what do I want to do? What is fun to me? And so the first thing I gut instinct went for was, where are all the pianos? I would say it was about 2 in the morning. I woke up and there was all this music playing. It was very loud, and I walked out into this dust storm in the desert, because that's where this festival is, and all these tents and lights and whatnot, people walking around even at this time. And I came across a piano bar that was lit in total white. I went and I sat at this piano and I played a few keys, realized it was kind of out of tune, and I started just playing for myself. And I don't know how much time passed, but I was just totally in it, immersed, and eyes closed, and I was playing all these Beatles songs and covers and improvs and whatnot. But by the time I looked up, there was just 40 or 50 people in a big circle around this piano. And I like looked up and was kind of like, whoa, that's cool. And then they kind of looked at me in shock, totally taken out of it because I stopped playing music, and then like, whoa, we're all here, we're all staring at each other. After that, I let out a big laugh and just started playing Imagine by John Lennon, because that always wraps the people in. You can kind of hypnotize people with sound and with what you do. Like when you're watching someone who's really good at something, you can immerse them in, and I haven't forgotten that sense. And so now when I'm trying to like perform for people or anything of that nature, my goal is to take them into a story that they didn't know existed. So that's kind of a formative memory of mine that right now has been stirring a lot of like, who am I sort of questions. You know, what do I want to do? Probably eccentric is the best word, but it doesn't really feel fair because that can get associated with different things, whether negative or positive. But most would say definitely someone who, when they know what they want, goes after it, but when they don't know what they want, it's utter chaos. I don't think I'm the kind of person who can lightly dip my toe into something and be like, that's enough. I have to go fully into it. I see that in myself with anything I try. It's like full immersion or no immersion at all, because I don't think it's worth it then. You know, it's more fun to be fully in it. So when I took up, painting, it was like, I'm gonna sell a painting for several $100s or I'm not going to paint at all. And then you built and it went crazy, and same with music and all the other weird kind of things that have come into my orbit. So we're on a boat right now. This is the sailing vessel Celtic song, or Celtic song, depending on the day. How I got into this boat is similar to most of my hobbies. I decided I wanted to do it one day, and in a very short span of time, everything came flooding on. And I remember I was taking a nap, and I was working on a project to build underwater robots at the time. And I woke up from this nap, and I walk into my dorm mate's kind of room, and I look out at the window, and the sky's all pink and sunset-y, and he's like, Christian, why are you in your underwear in my room? And I looked at him, and I remember I said this. I was like, Arion, I need to go sailing. And that was it. Like, I don't know what triggered it, but I just knew it. And I called my dad and said, hey, for Christmas, we're not getting each other gifts. We're going to go on a sailing lesson together. And he goes, got it. So we went on a sailing lesson, and it was super fun, and it was fantastic on these tiny little boats. Christmas Eve, I was back home, and I was looking for a way to do night watches. It was like, night watches are the next thing I need. To stand watch at night is a big passage for a sailor. At least it seemed like that when I was new to it. I went over to my neighbor's house because I knew that they used to live on a boat, and I said, I want a boat, and I want to train to be a really good sailor. And by chance, their sister was there. And she goes, I know the boat for you. There's a woman who owns a boat called Celtic Song, and she wants to train people to circumnavigate the world. And I go, I'm in. So I emailed Diane. We went on our first sailing kind of in the harbor. And then I started getting trained, and it was hard. It was really hard because everything was critiqued. I remember one of the crew who's much more experienced than me, named Jean. I was coiling a rope, and my coil looked a little sloppy. She's like, redo it. And I remember I was like, yep, that's what I need. You need absolute perfection in it. No mistakes, no worrying about mistakes. And my dad, he said that I had to learn all the sailing knots. So he gave me a sailing knot book, and I learned all of them. There was like 170 knots. Now I don't know them all. I know maybe 50. But it was line work that started improving me on the boat, because it's like I can tie anything to do anything. And slowly we trained more. I did a night passage and then longer passages, and it built up into training other people. And more recently now, I've been tested in something that I gave up a lot before. I would pick something up, get pretty good at it, and then I'd stop. But now I'm in like full commitment phase. It's the learning of putting in the hard work when it's not as fun and it's more difficult. And so now I'm aiming for a captain's license, and I get to cross an ocean next year for certain. But after that crossing, there's going to be many other crossings, and I'm sure some are not going to go great, and there's going to be disagreements and hardships. But now in my head, I'm resolute to do it, and I won't give up on that. And so sailing now, it's a place for me to feel small again, and like to be out amongst something massive and difficult that challenges me. It's a way to take away all distractions, because there's only one thing to focus on, and that's what you're doing on the boat. And then when I'm writing music on the boat, I feel much more focused than when I'm reading, and I get more done on the boat, even though I feel more relaxed. And I think that's kind of a product, being able to be outside of what is conventional, like the fast life. One of the last sailing trips I took was about 10 days where we did a little circumnavigation around Catalina Island. During that, I remember thinking, every day, I still had internet, and I looked at the news, and I read the news articles, and they all seemed so fast. It was like, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. But then on Catalina Island, these people go fishing every day, and this person's doing this, but it's very slowed down. There was no rush. You realize, although it's all kind of interconnected, what seems fast is just a product of how it's being told. Now, when I'm at home, I try and take that in a lot, and I go, although there's all this news pouring in at me that's telling me all these horrible things, this has been building up for a long time. It's been a slow process, and so now, if I want to do anything to help or anything of that nature, it's also going to be a slow and built-up process. So that's kind of what sailing is for me. Why do I play music? I don't know. I really like it. And a lot of times I think about this question a lot, and I go, am I trying to be famous, or am I trying to make wealth? But the thing that has been sticking with me a lot more is, one, I really love performing for people, but two, at some point I want to help push the field and boundary of music. There's a lot of classical musicians and people I know who have been trained classically, and if you say, write me a piece, it's the hardest thing they've ever done. But then on the other end, you have people who've taken nothing, and you go, write a piece, and it's the easiest thing they've done, but they don't have the technique or the complexities. And so I think a lot of the formal teaching takes away, because they show you all the tools, but they don't tell you how to use them. They go, here's all this theory and all these things that all the masters did. Now go off and make music. And that's daunting. But those masters didn't learn music like that. Instead, they came up with tools, and they go, I love counterpoint because that's what the church makes me does, and they build on it and build on it and build on it, and then you get, box pieces. Or if you listen to Mozart's works from when he started to when he's older, it's just his development of learning how to use triplets and quadruplets and different, tonalities within it. So there is a progression there. There's a linear way where Mozart was a baby and he was making music, and Mozart at his end when he was, a legend in music. And so I think the same thing here is, although you can learn classically, you're learning all these tools, but you're not learning what music is, and music is a progression in time. So I still think I'm very much in the infancy of writing music, because I've written maybe 100 pieces, but of those, not many have come to the light of day, sort of thing. And so, although I consider myself a lot better than most musicians and performers, I know that I am nowhere close to the areas of the people that I aspire to be. And I think that's a lot of product of, I need more discipline, I need to fully commit into it, but that's a whole other thing. But when I write, the music changes depending on what I decide to start with, and I think that is a great help. So if I start with piano, my strong suit in piano is chords, because in improvisation I learned hundreds of chord patterns that I came up with and constructed mathematically or not, and they built different things. And so when I start with piano, I start with chords, and the song evokes a really strong beat. But when I'm starting a song with lyrics, that's totally different. It's like you're playing a fretless string instrument, because you can do any pitch, you can do any rhythm. There's no bass tone that thumps, So when you're writing music that you start with singing and you start with lyrics, it's much more flowy. Same thing when I'm doing a stringed instrument. It's different. If you're writing, just a lead melody, then you're not going to be thinking about bass lines. But when you're playing a ukulele for someone in front of them, you're all the things. You have to play them all. and so you get a different feel. So I think where you start matters a lot. I'm pushing myself now to learn about rhythms, and I've been making a lot of beat patterns, but when I start a song with the rhythm, I'm finding I go, well, now what? Because the rhythm sounds great, I just want to hear the rhythm, but you need to add something on top, so I'm learning how to incorporate those kind of things in. There's two ways a song starts. It's either methodical or it's like a mused inspirational thing. I love it when the muse inspirational thing hits because it's a lot easier. It just flows out. You see some contrasting image in the world and you go, I'm going to write this. And the lyrics just flows out, and that's happened a couple times. But then there's another way, which is the methodical way, and this is how I conquer that feeling of I don't know what to write, and I put in constraints. I make my canvas smaller. And one of the things I most recently do is I think of a math equation, and I try and match it within pitch and music. And so one of them is sine waves are pretty cool. I think they're very interesting. They go up and down, and if you have two sine waves, they cancel out. And so what I started doing is I try and represent that symmetry of sine cosine in music. And if you think about it in pitch, then you'd have to decide contrasting pitches, but pitches don't cancel out, they add. So there's that sort of ideal comes forth, and from those kind of thoughts and constraints I put on, I can contrive out a new music. One of the ones that I'm more proud of is I came up with chord cycles, and so a chord cycle to me is a cycle of chords that doesn't repeat on the 4 or the 8 or the 16. No, it reaches the root chord again 400 chords down the line, something ridiculous like that. And you manage that by making sure you have a pattern that doesn't resolve to that root, which already presents itself a challenge. But you do that by coming up with just smaller patterns. So I came up with a pattern, half step down, 2 half steps up, half step down. And then from that, you build out this giant long chain of notes. And it doesn't sound great. It probably sounds really tense and strange. And then you take that weird ingredient and you chop pieces of it and go, I want this, that, and this. And from that you make music. And so on the ukulele, when I was trying to do the symmetry, sine and cosine thing, I was doing, okay, my fingers have to move in opposite directions all the time. And I wrote a really weird, contrived piece that didn't sound like music. It just sounded like weird pitches and tones. But from that, I took sections of it, and I was able to make those into music, and they still capture that eerie, tense feeling like it's some mathematical equation, but now it's aesthetic, because music's all about the listener. No one wants to listen to bad music. We hate it when at a party there's someone who plays Wonderwall on the guitar, and that's it. That's all they play. But if a guitar player comes out and is like, all right, write a math equation, I'm going to compose something to this math equation, that's really interesting. That's totally evocative, and I think that's where people need to push themselves. There's no such thing as writer's block. There's just how open are you to a new idea. I get most stuck writing music when I try and envision it in my head first, because then I set an expectation for what I'd like it to sound like, and I never can pull it out because the music in my head is totally perfect. But what comes out in real life can never be perfect. I truly believe that almost every artist in existence who's reached total greatness and whatnot had that. Because I think Mozart with his last Requiem, he was like, I'm getting a lot closer to what I find perfect in here in my head, but I don't think he ever reached it either. And it's that pushing for that, pushing to touch it. And then when you touch it, you can hold on for a little bit. You ride it like a wave, and then you're out of it. And I think that's kind of the goal of the music. But to do that, you can't set the expectation you need to build from a piece of granite. You need to take a rock and chisel away.
Footsteps fading in a line. Sunset turns just one more time. Sophie watches with eager eyes for the boy to pass her by. But no one hears.
I come from a background of performing and improv, and that means reading a crowd is everything, and you read what they want, and you can from that adapt the music you're playing. And when I was at Burning Man, I would improvise lyrics and songs about Black Rock City, because that's what it's called. And that's a very cool, lyric, black rock city. But in production and recording, I had a lot to learn. And so naively, when I first was like, I think I might want to do this more professionally, I was like, I'm going to record an album. I could do that. I did not know how to do that. Instead, I realized that the writing that I do in improv is nothing like the writing of an album. It's very different. One has to be finalized and one can be a little floppy. That took some getting used to, and I learned that lesson. I've been changing that, as well as an improvised set or even a show set can go for a really long time. You can play a song for 7 minutes and no one gets bored. But in recording, 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes. The longest songs push 5 to 7, but through that whole thing they change and whatnot, and I've learned a lot about that. Recording took a while to learn where to place my mics. Production is taking the longest, and it's probably one of the harder ones, because producing music can get really complicated really quickly because there's so many plugins and sounds and things you can do. It's literally infinite. And all the internet tells you is, you need this plugin, you need better samples, you need this fancy thing, and total lies. You can make amazing music with nothing. I mean, some of the best electronic music that first came out when it was surging up was made on FL Studio. And FL Studio is not the best DAW in the world, but they made great music. And so it's conquering that. And so I push myself. I don't download any new DAWs or instruments. The farthest I go is samples, but I forget to use them a lot. I just use a lot of the stock things, because then rather than, oh, what's this new cool toy, let me play with it, I'm learning the in-depth parameters of what was given to me in that toolbox, and it's helping a lot, because every time I produce a song, I don't intend for it to be released. I just make it. Usually it's not for myself, because I hate listening to produced music because it's not to where I'd like it to be yet. Every time it's a little closer, but it's not there yet. And I'm pushing to get it there. I want to be able to listen to a song I produced and be like, that was a bop. Like, wow, that was cool. Like when I come out of a performance and I know it felt good and was good. And that's going to just take time and producing and not being afraid to make bad music. You have to allow yourself to make tons of just awful junk. I've made so much junk. Things that if I showed to someone, they'd be like, it has potential, but it's a little weird. And so weird is not what you want. You want evocative. That's kind of the first big hurdle, is conquering these new fields of music in kind of a world that's telling you need this, this, and that. When the truth is you don't need any of that. You just need to practice and practice and practice. Which kind of leads into my second big obstacle in music, is the curse and the blessing of being able to have done so many things out in the world. And with all the news that comes out now and all the issues that exist, like I really sympathize with those things. And every time I can go contribute to that. Like if I wanted to right now, I'll start a coalition, I'll join some group. And so with COVID, I kind of allowed myself that. And as soon as COVID hit, first thing I did was start a 3D printing organization for SoCal. And we started printing out 3D printed PPE. And it was tiring and it took away from music, but I still was kind of unhappy. I was like, well, why am I doing this? Because I wanted to help and I am helping, but I still don't feel great. And I think that kind of drilled into me a bit of, okay, then you can't save the world if you're just jumping between problem to problem that comes out on the news. And I think that's something a lot of people should realize, is these are long running, issues, and they are going to take a long time to solve. But just because they're being put in your face now, you need to pick something and focus on it and see it through to the end, because then there will be change. If I put fully into music, then how can I contribute out? And a lot of people tell me, well, music is inherently positive. And I go, there's hundreds of people making music online, and it's like, but who is truly contributing to the community? And that has brought about new thoughts there of music is about community. And I wrote a paper on this for my last quarter at UCSD about music and protest, and about how you can use music to help in protest. And lo and behold, there's all these things coming out, protests about everything, climate change and civil rights that have been denied for a long time, indigenous rights, climate refugees. It's all there, and there's all these protests. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh, I need to make music for my studio work. And I feel very deeply discontent about that, because there's a way to take those two and to put them together. And my inkling is that the best way to proceed into the future is to start making the future that you'd like to be in. As much as I love mediating the problems of today, I think what would be better is you make the music that you think should be there tomorrow. And what is it going to do? And for me, that music's going to be moving people to activism. It's going to call people who've been doing bad things out. It's going to stir some fires up, and it needs to build community more than anything. Kind of the hurdle I have to step through in music is to think about, all right, I have to conquer some self-discipline tasks and become better at producing and recording and making things. But then I need to be able to create what I think should exist and do so in a way that moves other people to explore their own potentials. One thing I learned a lot at festivals is it's a lot of people with very open minds, whatever that means. I think when you have that collective of people and they're out there because they want to have fun, that's when they're most willing to do something for someone else, because there's a big culture of that already. Imagine you're at a big old concert, there's 10,000 people around you. The lead singer of the band goes, there's going to be a bunch of carts going around, and any clothes you're wearing on you, if you put them in there, we'll donate. That increases the fervor of everything. Most people change their minds not when they are forced to, but when they want to. And when they want to, it's because they've had a pleasurable experience. You take the right people and you put them in a situation with music, and you open them up and you say, all right, this is what I think we should do. And you get them talking, things can exist and happen because of that. I think it's just a pushing of kind of potentials. In the end, the better music you make, the more people will listen to it, which means if you make really good music with some messages in there, and you're standing for something and you're not willing to scoot around the bush you're saying, I think people will respect you for that, and you'll start to become a vessel for a lot of people's mistreatments and injustices. I'm still applying to jobs, and then I produce, and then I apply to jobs and I produce. And I've turned down a lot of opportunities because I'm like, no, this isn't the opportunity that I want, which has been very lucky. And in music, I've had the opposite, where it's like, I keep chugging along and people go, oh, this sounds pretty good. And it's like, well, aren't there any opportunities coming up? But I think that's a problem. I haven't put in enough time yet, and I haven't created a contribution that's yet worthy of that. I've performed a lot and had a lot of great fun, being invited to play at different places. But to make something where you're now invited into the realm of music, one, you need to be commercially viable, but two, you need to put something out that's worth it. I think there are a lot of artists who have created an EP and got picked up by someone a little bigger, and then they fizzled out, because that's only the first step. And so in my mind, I haven't even reached the first step. I'm still at step 0. That's a little daunting, but at the same time, that's kind of what pushes me, because I love music and I know that I have a lot of hard work and hours put into that. I believe that perseverance and the cream of the crop rises. My goal is to make the best music I can, and when I do, to make sure that I bring in a community of people to work with. I think you can get really lazy with the pandemic, because everything does feel slow, but it's not the good kind of slow, like a sailing slow or a camping slow. It's like everything is drawn into this long drone, and I think the key to breaking that is to change the routine. And one thing that really helped me was one day I said, I'm staying up the whole night and watching the sunrise, and that totally changed the dynamic of the next day, because one, I was immensely tired, but two, I realized these days are just a continuum. You can change them however you'd like, and that helped me, write and work more. Now I'm gonna try and push myself to wake earlier and go to bed later and produce longer and produce harder. In a year's time, my hopeful, wishful thinking is I have released a pretty damn good EP that's started influencing people in activism, and it's brought a community about it, where one, it's pushed a boundary of music, and two, it feels good and it makes you want to go and act on things. And from that, I can start to produce other pieces that take people in that direction, and I can start formatting the larger vision of music to what I want to do. I'd love to be able to perform again. And so in a year's time, I hope that we figured out kind of our pandemic situation, so that I can go and perform in piano bars or anywhere that lets me. until I can start playing for more people and influencing more things. On the other end, in a year's time, I might still be producing maybe another EP or something different, singles and whatnot, but I've had to pick up a job, and it'll probably be in some aerospace or tech sort of gig. But no matter what, in a year's time in May, I'll cross the ocean, so I can look forward to that. And if I'm doing really well in music, then I use that month-long crossing and the maybe 2 months out on the islands to write more music and to engage with some music that I've never heard before, like the music of the French Polynesian islands that exist now. And if it's in tech, then it's going to be the absolute escape from that so that I can go off into the sea and do something else.